And welcome back to episode 4 of the TXG podcast. My name is Ian Fraser.
I'm Matt Blois.
And this week we have a really special guest.
Absolutely.
We have one of the industry's youngest, brightest talents.
Yep.
But certainly no rookie.
No rookie. I mean, someone who's been out there for quite some time, working with tour players on their wedges every single week. And that's probably one of the more particular parts of the bag to sort of work with a tour player on.
I think people will have heard the name Aaron Dill for a long time.
Yeah.
And then when they maybe see his Instagram profile or see some videos with him in it, they're like, yeah, he looks like he's just a kid.
That's right.
I mean, he is such a fresh face. He looks so young. But, you know, he's been out there for quite some time. I first met Aaron in 2008, January 2008 at the Bob Vokey Chrysler Classic. I was out in Palm Springs with a good friend of mine who at the time was the Scotty Cameron putter rep.
Okay.
So we went out for dinner one night and Aaron was there and, you know, got to know him a little bit. And 2008, I was, how old would I have been?
Can you get the calculator?
Yeah, I know. I'm taking some time to answer that one. That tells you how long ago it was. So I was 25.
Okay.
So he was about the same age, maybe even a similar age, put it that way. And maybe even a fraction younger. And you know, I was amazed that, you know, he was at the level he was at and doing what he was doing at that time. And, you know, really cool. I'd got to know Bob for a little bit of time before that. So I first met Bob in 2004.
Wow, okay.
When the Open Championship was at Royal Troon. Got to know the guys a little bit. It was my 21st birthday and I was a young assistant pro.
Okay, yeah.
5th of July 2004. So I'm in the pro shop. The place is just dead.
Yeah.
So it was the week before the Scottish Open of Loch Lomond.
Okay.
So I get a phone call from Loch Lomond Golf Club saying a Titleist rep and the Aldila shaft rep are at the club right now, but they want to come over and play your club. Have you got space for them? So we were dead. So
this is while you're working at Troon?
I was working at a golf course called Cardross Golf Club in the west of Scotland. So the Open was at Troon that year.
Gotcha.
So they get a call and the guys are on their way over. It's about 10 minutes away. So they come on. I'm looking for them coming in. So I see them park the car and you know, coming over their club. So I go out and greet them. So turns out it's the Scotty Cameron tour rep, who turns out to be one of my best friends in the whole world, and the Aldila tour rep David Wilson, who's still on tour. I think David's working with True Temper now. So I meet the guys and they see it's my 21st birthday. My boss's wife had made a big fuss and put some balloons and things like that up, and so they're like, listen, we have to take you for a drink after we're finished, and you know, this is a big event, your 21st birthday. So we do that, and so they're like, well, for your birthday, we want to give you a gift. We want to get you a Scotty Cameron putter for your birthday and this and that. So they're like, come down to Troon, spend the day with us on the tour trailer, and we'll introduce you to the guys. So I went down on I think it was the Tuesday of the Open Championship. So the place was humming with activity. It was jumping. So I'm spending the day with them in the trailer and got to meet Vokey and, you know, Scotty and all those guys were there. Met a bunch of the tour players at the time, and you know, that was my first introduction to Vokey. So the following year, I was still working at the same golf club, and Larry, who worked for Scotty Cameron, calls me and says, Ian, Vokey's forgot all his medication back in the US. He's on about, you know, 15 different blood pressure tablets and this and that. Can you help us out with a prescription? He can't spend time without this. This is literally, you know, a game changer for him. So I was able to get one of the doctors at the club to write a prescription for him and get that fulfilled, and I met him at the airport with it. So he was kind enough to put me on the Vokey program for life. So
come on,
every time I saw them every year, so he would personalize wedges for me every time I would see him, and
what a story that is.
He was super appreciative of that, and that was my first introduction to Vokey. And ever since then, every time I've seen him. And it's one of those, you know, Vokey's a Vokey. I mean, he's Hall of Fame. He's a legend. He's Bob Vokey. Every time I've seen him since, and even if I've been somewhat kind of reluctant to kind of go, hey, Bob, remember me? Yeah. And I never do that. I always kind of like, you know, wait to see if he remembers, and he always does.
That's funny.
Like, he remembers. He's like, how's the family back in Loch Lomond? You know, it's still my favourite place to go fishing and all that sort of stuff. Big fisherman.
That's a great story.
Yeah, so, you know, Vokey is... Vokey's a real special guy, and I know, like I say, what he thinks of Aaron.
It's a big compliment, isn't it? Like, so he's a sort of a larger than life character that Bob is, and Aaron's really spent so much time with him. And Aaron, I'm sure, has his own ideas and skills that he brings, and as a team, it's hard to beat that team.
Well, I'm excited to see that development of his own skill set and sort of being given the bandwidth to make his own line within the Vokey range. Obviously, I can't ever see a day where a Titleist wedge is not called a Vokey wedge.
It'll be called Vokey.
I just can't. That's just what it is now. Yeah. But you'll have the AD series, a bit like that. There was a special, I believe it was like a lob wedge a few years back.
I think so.
That had a special grind on it that obviously Aaron had worked on with certain players. So really excited to see how that develops within the Vokey brand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Let's get the man on.
Let's get him on.
Okay, so we have this week's guest on the line, Mr. Aaron Dill. How are you?
Welcome. I'm great. How you doing, guys?
We're doing okay. We're doing okay. Fresh off of the last event of the season, the RSM Classic down at Sea Island.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just finishing up the season. It's been a great year. It's been a busy year. I'm looking forward to the holidays of being with my family.
That's right. You must be.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I mean, not only the last week of the year, obviously a major week for you guys launching SM8.
That's right.
Yes, we've been working really hard the last 2.5 years, and it's really fun to bring the product out and share it with everybody and get the feedback and see what everybody thinks. And now I get to go home and start preparing for what's next.
So that's literally how long you guys have been working on this version of the SM line. Has been 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the entire package. Some of the parts of this new line we've been working on for even longer than that. So, when we're sitting around a table together and we're spitballing ideas, some of the ideas are kind of wild. So it takes a little bit longer for us to do those things, but it's essentially 2.5 years for us to design and get something ready for a launch on a PGA Tour event.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, Aaron, why don't we go back? Why don't we go sort of tell us a little bit about yourself, sort of even pre-Titleist? I'd love to know. I mean, you and I met quite a long time ago. I mean, I remember it a lot better than you will. We met in 2008 out at the Bob Hope. I was with Mr. Larry Watson, and you were kind of I was with him. I was making my way out to Florida to spend the winter practicing with Larry at his home, and you had, I think, just joined the team. Maybe in 2008, you'd been with them for a couple of years or so, and that sort of thing. So maybe take us back a little bit, even before that, and then how you joined Titleist, and tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I think let's see. I think it was April 2005 was when I came on board with Titleist, and I was 22 or 23 years old at the time, so I was pretty young. And I started with our Fitting Works program. And we had this great program called Fitting Works where we built these little mobile tour vans, and we took them all up and down the West Coast. That was the first one that Glenn Muller and I did together. And that's kind of how I got my start. It's how I got to know Bob, how I get to know our leadership team. I worked some tour events from time to time, but that's really how things got started for me. And Bob was so gracious in allowing me to, be in his office, learn from him, pick his brain, talk to his crew, and really, I was just really fortunate. Right place, the right time. But that was kind of the starting point for me before I came on tour. Yeah,
I mean, when you get that call, and you're kind of 22 years old, and you've been in the job for a couple of years, so you're maybe 24, 25 at that point when you get the call to come and work with Voke, and to be selected by that guy, that must be pretty special.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. Before I got into golf with Titleist, I was just a golf guy. I was a golf nerd, loved the game, loved equipment, and to be able to go into a retail store and pick up a Vokey wedge and buy one myself and just fall in love with the product, and then one day get to work for the guy. it's pretty neat. It's a pretty neat story. So I was very fortunate. But I've been on tour full time with Bob since 2007. So this will be coming up on 13 years. So
I mean, you probably must be one of the youngest veterans out there now. I mean, 13 years is a long time to be living that tour life.
Yeah, I feel aged over a decade of hardcore travel. We travel a lot. You talk to a lot of these guys who work on the tour. It's 35 to 40 weeks a year traveling. That's quite a bit. So I feel a little bit older, but my spirit's just as good as it was when I first started. And we're seeing some younger faces come in. We see still a lot of veteran faces, but we've got a really cool mix of young and older tour reps that get the job done every week.
So 2007 sort of joined the tour, and yourself and sort of Bob are the team that are making that happen. So 2010 rolls around, the groove change comes into effect. How did that change design and kind of how you guys were strategizing with fitting and getting the best wedges in people's bags? Because that must have made a bit of a change.
Yeah, that's a great question. We knew that grooves were going to change in 2010, and it took us some time to prepare for that. We weren't thinking necessarily about the fitting aspect. We knew that we were going to get a reduction in spin. We didn't truly understand the depth of how that would change things. So when we finally launched the product, we learned a handful of things right away. We learned that obviously spin was going to be down. We learned that the launch angles were going to go up. We learned that carry numbers were going to shorten some. And we knew that greenside spin was going to change the game as we know it. The one interesting thing that we learned was that we realized that even though spin went down and it made some shots harder, in some ways it made the game easier. When I don't know if you guys remember this, but if you guys ever had grooves that were really, really spinny, pre-2010, you'd hit these shots and they would hit the yardage you wanted them to go, and then they would suck back 30 feet.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And you'd be like, you know what? As cool as that was, I don't like this really long putt I've got now. So, we learned all these things, and it really challenged us to put more emphasis on fitting and to rethink kind of our approach to how we help these guys get better. And that all started with that groove. So, now we're focused a lot on bounce. We're focused a lot on soul styles. We're focused a lot on a lot of different things. And then I think a lot of that just kind of inspired us all to do our jobs just that much better.
Yeah, I remember probably back in, I think it must have been around sort of 2010, 11-ish. And I remember talking to Bob and asking him himself, I said, how are you going to account for the groove change and kind of obviously how that's going to make the job that you've got as a designer much more difficult? How are you going to sort of get the ball to continue to stop as quickly? And he had a golf ball in his pocket at the time, and he literally pulled it out of his pocket and he dropped it on the floor and he said, we're going to do it like this. We're going to make the ball drop more vertically. So what he was basically alluding to at that point was we're going to make more sole designs that will allow trajectory to change so that you're not always relying on just spin to get the ball to stop. You can also rely on angle of descent. And, just to hear that from the man and so much, forward thinking or so, he just always has been so forward thinking with that sort of stuff. It's impressive.
Yeah, and I think, getting back to that, I think, that's kind of really where we started to see a shift in the loft, and 62s and 64s became kind of a premium club for a while. We don't see as many today, but back then I think a lot of guys were very interested in experimenting with those things, and it was kind of cool to see how that all kind of unrolled and rolled out.
How has the evolution of the golf ball changed things, Aaron? Because obviously, the original Pro V1 to the Pro V1 now, and the way Pro V1 is kind of flip-flopped and that sort of thing. Has that made a big impact on what you guys have done from a design standpoint?
Yeah, and I have to hand it to our ball team. Obviously, Titleist makes the best ball in golf, and we're very fortunate to be able to use that with our Vokey products. At the same time, it seems like there's this trend in distance, and we see a lot of golf balls maybe spinning a little less from time to time. And our brand has done a great job of kind of blending distance and spin, so we have a lot of great options for that. But again, we work a lot with our ball team to kind of co-design products. So we get a lot of information from them. They tell us kind of what their plans are, and then we can help make our products better by designing around their goals or vice versa. So. Obviously, we spend a lot of time working on how we can best fit our players. if guys are using a ball that spins a little less, we'll take that into account. Like, hey, if that's the case, we need to rely on a little more rollout. So here's the yardage now you need to be hitting to, or these are the kinds of things you need to think about when you're picking your targets when you're playing golf. So the golf balls, again, they're exceptional. But again, yeah, a difference. The old balls spun more; these ones spin maybe a little less from time to time. But again, we've done a good job working with them to better produce our products.
I think it's one thing we found pretty interesting probably about a month ago, Ian. We did some bounce related videos. Yeah. Aaron, we did some testing with sort of really low bounce, mid bounce, high bounce wedges, and the amount of spin difference that could be made from strike location. Yeah. I think some of that was really interesting in that grooves you probably agree, have just been the focus. Like, I'm getting spin from my wedges because of grooves. Yeah. And then from there, I think people generally accepted, maybe face milling would have been next on that list, especially once the groove rule came into account. But the amount that a sole and a bounce angle, we saw, I think, 600 RPMs in some cases between a low bounce and a high bounce wedge. The strike location being a bit high, kind of dropping your spin, and being a bit lower, kind of raising your spin, lowering your trajectory. That was something that, for me personally, it wasn't even really on my radar. I thought it was really just all kind of sole interaction. Yeah. But the actual strike and then launch conditions effect was really cool for me to see.
Yeah, talking about that, it's interesting you say that, because when we go back to the 2010 groove rule change, that was one thing that we really paid a lot of attention to. Was, okay, if we can't make our grooves spin at the level they were, how can we pick up something? And we realized, again, that if you bounce fit properly, and in some cases if you give guys more bounce, it just ensures that your hit location remains lower on the face. On our wedges, we're looking at grooves 2, 3, and 4 is kind of that sweet spot. And if we could figure out a way for guys to stay in that place, they would have lower launches and essentially more spin. And so when we were working with guys, we might take them out of some lower bounce product and move them into something a little bit higher, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's the flight I'm used to seeing. Wow. And I'm seeing that spin too. So again, we learned so much about fitting. Well, at least I did. I know I did personally, that I learned a lot more about fitting when we had to make that switch. And it kind of rewired my thinking.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And when sort of almost that it forces you to understand the nature of the physics a little bit more. I mean, I think as a fitter, I found the same thing when I went from TrackMan into GC Quad, was being so aware of strike location on every single shot. It actually helped me become a significantly better, fitter. And obviously TrackMan has impact location. Sort of you can test that as well now, but quad is so precise, and we never used to have that. We used to rely on Dr. Scholl's to see where the strike was and things like that. So it's evolved, and it continues to evolve so much, and we just continue to become better fitters because of that. And tell us a little bit about sort of the really sort of familiar sole designs now that people are, the S grind and the M and the D. Tell us how, some of those really popular sole grinds came about.
Yeah, so you look back on history when Bob joined our brand in the late 90s. His role was to come on board and to, help us build our wedge business. And Bob was, he's a legend. He's a legend as a designer and a legend in the game. And most notably, just a great guy and a hard worker. And he wanted this wedge line to be very successful. So a big part of what he was doing is he was working with all these guys, and he was trying to fit them, and he was trying to learn what made them better around the greens. And that's where a lot of these sole designs came about. Like the S grind was after Steve Stricker, and the T grind was after Pernice. And he spent a lot of time with Phil Mickelson when he was a staffer, picking his brain and learning from Phil. Phil's obviously one of the greatest short game players of all time, and just an incredible volume of knowledge and experience. And Bob was really good at saying, okay, teach me more. He'd take that information and he'd create different soles, and that's how kind of our program began. Was what's working for the best players in the world and why. And can it work for consumers? Yes, it can. So obviously some things need to be changed for the consumer level, but it all starts with the tour. These guys are really, really good. They're the best at what they do. And that knowledge is extremely valuable for us in our design process. So, you look at those different letters, it's all part of the past and what Bob created.
That's really cool. In fact, it's a great segue because I'm just looking at all the viewer questions we had specifically for you, Aaron, and a lot of them were related to grinds, different letters associated with them, where they came from. So it's I think you did a great job of kind of explaining where those came from, because I think it's sometimes people find it hard to say, Phil Mickelson invented that grind, what's that have to do with me kind of thing. But the way you explain that, it makes sense. I mean, that's what great wedge players do, but also you factored in, what an average player does as well and how the sole should interact with the ground. But that was a major question. So I'm really glad you got to that one too. Probably the number 2 question. I think this is one I've had this question myself. Probably correct that forged wedges are more rare, Ian, in the market than a cast product.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think there's probably only 2 or 3, major companies that do forge a wedge. So Aaron, from your perspective, what is your thought process in terms of, what is the advantage maybe of a cast wedge? Or I guess, why do you think that Vokey and obviously many other brands go with a cast product in the wedges versus going with forge, where I guess the irons are accepted to be forged most of the time as a product benefit, whereas the wedges seem to be more cast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you look at golfers, and I think that the word forged is perceived as a higher quality type of product, and in some cases maybe it is. But you look at wedge design, and you realize, when wedges really started to be good, it's back in those early Cleveland days, and we used 8620 back then, which is a mild carbon steel. And I think, when you tested this product or the steel against forgings, people had a hard time determining what was what. 8620 is a really nice soft metal. So with that being said, when we're sitting around tables and we're talking about design, these are things we talk about. Do we really want to do a forged product? Do we want to stay cast? These are questions we ask each other a lot. And I think what we find is that we can do a lot with castings. Castings give us the freedom to do things that forgings would be tricky to do. I don't think it's necessarily about, the cost. I mean, yes, there might be some other costs, that are part of that. But the reality is that, over here, we're trying to make the best thing that we can make possible. And if you know anything about Bob Vokey will tell you, I don't sacrifice performance, I don't sacrifice feel, and I do not sacrifice the look. If we felt like a forging was the best thing for us and the best thing for the marketplace, we would do it all day, every day. But cast has been really successful for us, and we can do a lot with it. We can put a lot of technology into it, so we continue to keep down that path.
I think that's really interesting. So it's design flexibility then, Aaron, you'd say is kind of the main factor there. I
would, yeah. I mean, we can do a lot of great stuff with it. And again, like I said, we're going to make the best possible thing we can.
Very cool.
I think I'm so glad you addressed that kind of the perception at times can be that forged is a more premium product over cast, but that's certainly not the case, as you said. I mean, with regards to our listeners, Aaron, how would you advise them to tackle this sort of theme of bounce? Because there's so much confusion as to what different bounces, and we talked a little bit about gear effect and having a little bit more bounce in order to encourage more spin through a lower strike and things like that. But I know Bob has always kind of been a fan of having more bounce and not shortchanging yourself on that. What are your thoughts on bounce?
Yeah, so back when I first started, that was one thing that Bob always talked about. We had a lot of low bounce clubs in the industry, even with us, and Bob would always say bounce is your friend, which he was alluding to. If you had a little bit more bounce, it would probably be helpful. I think you'd benefit from it, because I think as golfers we have this ego where we need less bounce more often. And a lot of times when we fit, especially when I fit on tour, I'll blindly fit players. I'll give them wedges, and I say, you're not allowed to look. I don't want them to know what I don't want them to know what I'm handing them. And the reason being is a lot of times I want to, when the fitting's finished, I want to be able to kind of blow their minds and say, listen, you came into this fitting thinking this is what you needed. and this is what best fits you. But in reality, this is what you tested best at, and these are the reasons why. And I think when you can do that, it really expands people's wedge horizons, and they have a deeper understanding into what fits them physically, just based on what they do and the courses they play on. So as far as what I say to the consumer out there who wants to get a fitting, or at least wants to choose wedges that best fit them, I think about a few things. Obviously, find somebody who has the resources or the clubs that you can go out and test different things. Think a little bit about your course conditions, where you play. Are your golf courses soft or firm? What kind of grass are you playing on? If you're playing on ryegrass, chipping's probably pretty easy. If you're playing on grainy Bermuda in Florida, it's probably going to be pretty tough. So you're going to need to give yourself a little bit more bounce. But find a place that you can hit all the different things that the brand that you want to play has, and really test all the different bounces. I mean, I don't think you're ever going to truly know what you like until you've tried them all. And once you do that, you'll have a better understanding of what works best for you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. It always comes back down to getting deep into the fitting element and being able to go and try some different products. And I know one of the shafts, one of the key sort of questions that our consumers had and viewers had was on shafts. That was one that pops up a lot for us, Aaron. And obviously, Vokey has went with a dynamic gold sort of an S2 or S3 product over the years. Tell us a little bit about what you guys have found from doing some sort of testing on shafts and some of the variances you see from shaft to shaft.
Yeah, we've tested. We do shaft testing all the time, to be honest. It's a big part of a part of our launch strategy. Are we using the right shaft in what we're selling? And you look at the market now. There's so many different options, and I can understand how people would be confused about what they should buy. I will tell you that the S200 shaft is something we use in our product because we feel like it's a great balance of weight and feel. And wedge play is so much about that. You need weight so you can feel what the shaft is doing, where the head is at, and you also need feel, so it's a little bit softer in the tip. So that shaft really works nicely for, the majority of what our consumers are looking for. On tour, on the other hand, I always base my shaft selection or my shaft recommendations off of the iron set, so I'll work off that first. So if a guy's playing, we'll use Jordan Spieth as an example. He's playing Project X in his irons. I know he does that for spin reasons, for feel reasons. It's what he's always played. But I'll work off that and I'll work through the set. And I always tell guys, if you're playing a pitching wedge and a gap wedge, I probably match the shaft that you have in the irons into those, because those are essentially 10 iron, 11 irons. They're full shot. You're not manipulating those much. There's not a lot of off-speed hits. There's some, but it's not as slow as, say, a sand wedge and lob wedge. So, you can use the same shaft in those. And as you start to increase loft, start to increase feel. Keep up the weight, soften things a little bit. And I feel like that's usually a good baseline for guys to go with if they want to choose shafts.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah.
That's that. I mean, and I think that's pretty consistent with the message that we kind of give out over here as well, Aaron. Whether it's soft stepping, whether it's going to another kind of brand that has slightly better characteristics for those, as you say, off-speed shots. I think that's a great way to put it. I really like that.
It's very, very good. Yeah.
Very cool.
It's one of the most asked questions we get, actually, Aaron, is about 100%. What wedge shaft do you recommend? And I think it's going to be great for a lot of people. Maybe they've got that advice, but a lot of people get the wrong advice for that. I think they have either perfectly matching or they don't do the 60 with the softer shaft that gives them that feel.
I think they do as well. You see a lot of guys, they'll buy a set of irons and they'll add wedges and they'll just say, just put the same shaft that I have in the irons all the way through the wedges. And maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong. In most cases, it's usually on the stiffer side, so guys lose some feel. And I always try and tell people, if you're still concerned or confused on what you should choose, just go with the one that feels the best. I think that's really a great way to, I think it's a great way to choose something, is if it feels right, if you feel like it's what you really want it to feel like, then you can't go wrong.
And how have you found, Aaron, just when you guys have been doing your fitting, have you introduced launch monitors a little bit more into that, or are you still going a lot when you're working with these guys who are they're so finely tuned? Are you going more off of sort of the visual and feel based fits?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you look at PJ Tour, really when you look at just golf in general, we have so many electronic gadgets that are involved in golf now. You've got TrackMan and all kinds of different gadgets to measure spin numbers and launch angles and all that stuff. And I try and tell players, hey, when you started playing golf, did you have these resources? And the answer is always no. I didn't have TrackMan when I was a little kid. I learned how to play golf instinctively. And a lot of times when I use a machine like a launch monitor, I do it to validate carry numbers, and I do it to show guys that spin can be found and spin can be reduced based on hit locations on the face. And a lot of times that's a great way to validate little bits of information to make these guys better. I try to tell them, hey, if you're trying to work on shots, that are 70 yards long, you need to instinctively know what that feels like. You can use a TrackMan to validate the number, but this game, you're not allowed to take that machine with you when you go play. So I use it to validate little things and to share bits of information on how these guys can be more knowledgeable and what works right.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant piece of information that really makes me think of some of the better fits I've had with guys on wedges. And sometimes you hand someone a club and it's the exact same loft, it's the exact same bounce as the other ones around it, but they just can't dial in that number. So you've got, like you said, 70-yard shot, but they keep hitting it 60 and 82, and they just can't regulate that number. And then, there's that one club that, whether it's a shaft that gives them a specific feel and just the way the club interacts with the turf, they can just hit that number, and that keys much, much more with their natural feel. And then the numbers all tend to fall into line, and that's one of the things I've loved about doing more launch monitor based fittings in the last little while. And we sort of have to do that in here. We don't have the luxury of being outside, being up in Canada. We're indoors, most of the year with the weather being not so good. So using the launch monitor for that, it's very, very fascinating to watch someone regulate themselves with the equipment.
One of the more interesting questions we got, Aaron, was about tour bag setup. So tour players that you work with on a weekly basis, what would you say is probably some of the more interesting bag setups you've seen in the wedges, kind of to do with the grinds, maybe loft setups, bounce angles?
That's a good question. We could use Justin Thomas as a great example. He uses 4 wedges: pitching wedge, gap wedge, sand wedge, lob wedge. And I remember this years ago. He was working with his coach. At the time, he had standard lofts, and he was working with his coach. And he came back a few weeks later, and he said, "Hey, can you spec out my wedges and tell me what the new lofts are?" And I said, "Sure." So I spec'd them out, and I go, "Hey, these are way off." And I have to agree. Like, I have to agree, for a tour player, it's a big deal. And in his case, I was like, "Yeah, these are pretty far off what they're supposed to be." And he goes, "Well, I'm hitting them perfectly. And I really just want to keep them that way. So can you take those numbers and put them in the system?" So I said, sure. So he was standard 46, 52, 56, 60. And when he came in with his new specs, they were completely different. They were 47 and a half, 52 and a half, 57, and 60.5. So totally different than what I was used to. But at the time, he said, "Listen, I'm getting the numbers that I want. Everything was working perfectly." And that's kind of how the whole thing started with him. Was, now we're welding out the lofts on his stuff, and we're stamping the new numbers. But I will say this, when I'm working with tour players, I try and keep the process very simple, and I try and simplify it for them, because I think it's important that their minds are sort of at ease, that they know that what they have it makes a lot of sense based on what their games need, what their conditions need. And I always emphasize that each one of the wedges that they choose needs to have purpose and reason. Instead of just picking M grinds and everything, or S grinds and everything, we need to pick grinds that help us play better golf. And so I try and give them different things that will expand their shot capabilities. So one high bounce club, one low bounce club, and really sort of open up the door to some creativity, greenside or from the fairway.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant.
Very cool.
I think the versatility setup, or the versatile setup, is a real great piece of advice. And yeah, not just going down the route of being one way, whether it's high bounce, one route, whether it's low bounce. You have to be prepared for all conditions and shot types. And Different golf courses that you might face different challenges. So I think that's great advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Aaron, tell us a little about, last week, so Tyler Duncan, gets his win, SM8's in the bag. That must be really cool to see.
It's a great feeling. Yeah, it's a good feeling. When we're planning these launches, it's always kind of the dream or the goal is to build a great product, share it with your players, have them embrace it and love it, and put it in the bag right away, and then to validate it with a win right away is a really big deal for us. It just shows that the years of hard work that we put into this product is paying off. So, and I'm super pumped for Tyler. He's such a great guy, and he's so talented. And I just love that he got this win, and that he can go home and just be very comfortable with his game, and know that he's got a job for a few years is really pretty darn good. So.
What could you? I think SM8 is obviously going to be really on everyone's mind since it just came out. There's, you guys have obviously released lots of information about it, and people are seeing it being tested. What would you say is kind of, from sort of behind the scenes, what would you say is one of the more interesting things about the way that was developed, or maybe a feature that people wouldn't quite look to that was sort of, I guess you would find integral, you and Bob, to do with the design?
So I'll start by saying that every time we sit down and we design new product, we do it from a lot of different angles, right? And the one thing that I've told everybody from the start of doing this job and learning from Bob is that we don't compromise on the stuff that truly matters, which is the look, the options in the soles, the score lines, and then if we can add technology to it to make it better, we will. We certainly don't do that to create a story that isn't real. I have a hard enough time trying to get new product in the bag. It's a lot easier for me to be able to tell an honest, true story of a technology story that comes in a beautiful package, and that's really the whole goal behind it. Is how do we create what our tour players want, which is beauty and technology wrapped into something, and we do that with each line. It may not be a massive leap, but it's always a leap. We know that, so that's always the goal. And SM8 is a combination of a lot of things. It's a classic package of profiles. It's the best cruise in golf. It is a technology story. It's all the things that we focus on, just improved upon.
I think that's a really good answer, because people often, when a new model comes out, I think they want to know, why is there a new model? And I think it's cool that you guys are more, I don't know if cautious is the correct word, but you don't want to mess up what's already so good about that line. So you're carrying, how long, 30 years almost of Vokey design, all the things that are correct about it, all the things that people like, and then just trying to tweak them a bit so that they're a little bit better. But it's not, people shouldn't think of it as going back to the drawing board and SM8's a redesign and here's, a brand new wedge. That would almost be detrimental, I guess, to the process.
Yeah, that's never our goal. We never try and redesign anything. I mean, we always try and improve upon it. And that's the cool thing about the tour, is that after we launch SM8, I spend the next 2 years gathering data on what's working and, more importantly, what isn't working. And that's the information that I share with Bob and the team, and that gives us a better understanding into what we need to focus on in the next line.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. We're super fortunate
Absolutely.
to get you the timing of this, and obviously with SM8 and the season just wrapping up. Matt and I are super thankful that you made the time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love doing this kind of stuff. So if you guys will have me on again, that'd be great.
We will 100% have you on again.
We'd love
Absolutely.
to. And we'll look forward to seeing you in Orlando as we usually do. So that'll be great to get a catch up in person.
I'll make sure to bring my white coat.
Wouldn't have it any other way. That's right. Yeah,
that's right.
Awesome.
Okay. Thanks, Aaron.
All right, pal. We'll have a great kind of Thanksgiving this week, and we'll chat to you soon.
Yeah. Happy holidays, guys. Thank you.
So that was probably one of the more interesting, but also kind of like an inspirational story for, someone who's basically at about as peak a position in the golf industry as there is, working with tour players every week, integral in designing some of the best clubs that are out there that are in the hands of, not just good players, but also recreational players. And he kind of got into golf the way you did, basically the same sort of route through the tech rep.
That's right. He literally entered at the ground level.
Yeah.
And I think that's so refreshing to hear that, you know, there is a route to the top where he's at right now.
He's the top.
He's literally at the top of that wedge game with Bob, and you know that they're a team that truly dominate that wedge space. But he started as a tech rep.
Yep.
He's in the trenches, going around the country, fitting people, and that's exactly how, you know, that's exactly was my own story with TaylorMade, and you know, just being a tech rep. And I firmly believe it was the best foundation I could ever have had. I actually think, to be honest, that when we employ people who haven't done it, I think that they are at a disadvantage.
Yeah, just the sheer volume of people and golf swings that you see.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And you know, when you go to these demo days, people aren't paying to be at the demo days.
That's very true.
So, you know, you're getting bundles of them at a time, and you know, you're getting such exposure to every type of ball flight and every type of golfer that there might be. And you might be traveling into an inland golf course, a seaside golf course. That's, you know, that was certainly the way I would do it. And I mean, you just can't beat reps.
It's actually better that you did it in Scotland, I think, because here, if you drive 5 hours, you probably still have the same conditions.
Similar conditions.
In fact, if I'm being totally honest, you probably have to drive a lot further than that. So you were in a good spot. I mean, Europe is like that, obviously. You drive 5 hours, you're in a different country. So you were able to go windy conditions, dry conditions, wet conditions. So it's a good experience.
I mean, you know, obviously, you know, the people Aaron were exposed to at a young age. I mean, that's, you know, that's just going to accelerate his development, and that was certainly clearly the case. I mean, you're getting into the game 22 years old and being on tour, you know, within kind of 2.5, 3 years, and being basically handpicked as Bob's right hand man.
Out of many people that probably were candidates for that kind of a position.
Sure.
I mean, I think there's mistakes people make when they look at how to be the best at something.
Yeah.
I think one of them is that person must have known someone, that person had a connection to this person, and that's why they've ended up there, which is usually wrong. So someone like Aaron's a great example, because he's just gone the route that anyone can really go. If you want to apply, you want to become a tech rep and do the work. Yeah. But then obviously you have to remember, you know, he's obviously a very talented guy.
Very, very talented.
He's not, I mean, you can't just jump in and say, oh, I'm going to figure it out. And he's obviously very talented.
You know what? And the thing is, Matty, that's the chemistry required for greatness.
Yeah.
And I you know, I don't use that lightly. That is the chemistry required for greatness. You have talent.
Yep.
You have work ethic. You have phenomenal mentorship, and you have a phenomenal platform.
I agree.
All of those things combined will allow someone to become an Aaron Dill.
Absolutely.
And age is just a number.
Yeah.
You know, the experience he's gained now working with the players he has. Some of those, I loved hearing the stories of working with guys like JT.
I know.
And you know, that his specs were off of what, you know, they were supposed to be, but they were working.
That's what he wanted.
That's the only thing that matters.
Of course.
Who cares what the number is? Who cares, you know, what it says? It's just, does it work? Does it achieve the goal?
Yeah. And then having, for him, obviously, I think sort of, I guess the word is sort of like the foresight to know that he's not there to change what they're playing. I mean, maybe they need that off spec. Maybe they need last year's model. And I think you see it with the golf ball too, with Titleist does that too. I mean, they're just trying to make that player better. They're not necessarily saying, you know, you need to be the poster child for SM8 just came out. And obviously great that SM8 won its first week, which Aaron was obviously, I can see why he's happy about that.
He's stoked,
but he's not like they're pushing people into it. It's just, you know, if that makes that player better, and obviously it did, then, you know, it's deserved.
There's a level of trust that's built up obviously over the years, knowing that, like Aaron said, like he and Bob do not sacrifice anything on performance. So if they're bringing something out onto tour, it's because it's better. Yeah, it's not just because it's different or it has a different design or marginal gains. Like he called it. He said it's a leap in performance.
Yeah. And it has to be, exactly, it's worthwhile for them to put out another model. And and I think the reason I think it was good to get his perspective on, you know, so what is SM8 as a product? He was, I think from the very beginning, he was, you know, realistic would probably be the way I would identify it. He's saying, you know, we have 30 years of extremely good wedge design. We're not throwing that away. We're just sort of putting something new that will help it improve a little bit, but it's incremental. It's not, you know, you're not going back to the drawing board every time.
No, absolutely not. Well, that was great, and we're so fortunate to have had, you know, the guests we've had on so far.
It's a hell of a lineup.
The bar has been set pretty high.
It has been, yeah.
But we're not planning on dropping those standards anytime soon. I mean, it's it's all about momentum. We're off to California next week.
So we have some great stuff planned while we're there for the TaylorMade event.
Yep.
Probably some in-person podcast recording, which should be good.
Yeah.
I think we've already said this on the podcast, but the beauty of the podcast is like the access to someone, just sort of, can you grab the phone for 45 minutes and you have an amazing conversation and we record it. But it'll be cool to be sort of in front of someone and sort of have that conversation, just sort of capture that in person.
I know. I think the obviously the energy is generally a little bit different when you're in person, and you can sort of feed off of one another, and I'm excited to do that. We actually, we know that most of the head people from TaylorMade are going to be there, so we don't really have a kind of idea yet, other than we're going to try and do some stuff with Trotty.
So Trotty, I think, is on our short list for that for sure. We know a couple of Canadian PGA Tour players are going to be down there.
Sure, we'll do some stuff with.
So Nick Taylor's going to be there, and Mike Lidgick are down there. We're definitely going to film some videos with them as well. So, but we're going to prioritize some podcast action as well, which is good.
Okay, so the podcast train rolls on.
It continues.
Exactly. And as we said, I think we released out there on our social media platforms. We want to know who you guys want to see us get on the podcast.
I think I don't know why this is just coming to me now. That idea you had to get questions, viewer questions on Instagram prior, I actually think that was really, really good. Mm-hmm. I'd like to do that probably every time. Aaron and Martin and David, I think they liked all those questions that people had, and it's perfect just to sort of say, what do you guys want to hear? I mean, ultimately the podcast is not for us. I mean, I like doing it. It's great to have the conversations, but we're doing it because we want to introduce, I guess, the stories to everyone listening. So the more we can involve people in that and let them kind of dive in with a question, the more we'll do it.
That's exactly. I mean, someone like Aaron, who does what he does inside the ropes of a PGA Tour event, that stuff doesn't always make its way into kind of mainstream media or
that's true
digital media. It's becoming easier to get access to that stuff, but it's those stories don't often make their way out there.
As an avid golfer, Golf Channel watcher, you just really can't reach into that world. Honestly, we've only done this 2 weeks. The stories I've heard just from these people, I've never had access to them before. It's very interesting. It really is. It's on a good train.
Excited to see where we're going to end up before we sort of come to the end of season 1 here.
I know. All
Excellent. Right. Okay, guys, stay tuned, and we'll see you again soon.